our speaker. I made a few notes here, Bill, and because the purpose of this is to make us all feel kind of inadequate about our accomplishments so far. But Bill, in addition to having over 30 years of experience in running internet and technology companies, and tell me if I get anything wrong here, was a co-founder and CEO of DaVinci Systems, provider of desktop software for over 3 million users, which was acquired by On Technology. Went on to be an investor in a venture capital firm, Greylock, where he invested in a lot of the early startups for the internet, including DoubleClick. Then moved on to a small company here in town that any of you that were in Atlanta in the late 90s, early 2000s would have heard of, IXL. As the CEO of IXL, who really kind of invented the internet services concept, grew to 2,500 employees and had premier customers of Delta, GE, FedEx, some other companies we've heard of. After we went through the bubble transition, Bill moved himself into the direct electronic marketing business of Silverpop, grew Silverpop to the company it is today, which is now an IBM company, but around 500 employees. I think 5,000 customers I had in 40 countries. So has grown the premier business in the world for direct email marketing. Along the way, has picked up a few awards. A couple of them I've noted here. Consulting Magazine's most influential consultant in the world, something we should all aspire to. Direct Marketing Association's Marketing Award of Excellence, and Technology Association of Georgia Lifetime Achievement Award. In his spare time, Bill authored a book called A Quiet Revolution in Email Marketing, and he sits on or has sat on over 24 boards of both private and nonprofit organizations. And of course, he's a regular speaker at industry, business, and academic events, for which we thank you very much. And Bill got his education in EE from North Carolina State, OACC, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. So I hope you're all feeling like maybe we haven't achieved what we need to at this point in our career, and we can strive for more. But with that, with Bill's wise words here, hopefully we can all do that. And thank you, Bill, for joining us.
Oh, thanks. So my mother told me when I was young that I would never be successful if I didn't learn to play golf. I've never learned to play golf, and I'm still working on it.
Just imagine what you'd accomplished if you had learned that.
That's true. Let's see if I can make this thing work here, so I'm not going to be standing in front of the. There we go. How's that? Good. Can you all see that?
Good.
Perfect. So I occasionally get asked to talk about topics, and I actually love the opportunity because it causes me to sit down and spend a few hours thinking about actually how things get done and reflecting on the things I've read and seen and been learned from the mentors I've been fortunate enough to have in my career. So this was an opportunity to do the same, and I appreciate it. I've talked about some of this stuff before, but I took the opportunity to refresh it, and it's, I think, the most important thing we can do as business people. It's said so often, we actually don't really, we almost just sort of poo-poo it. We roll our eyes. Of course, it's the team, right? You know, thank you for all the accolades of my success. I couldn't have done it without a team. And you know, people are the most important thing in our business, and particularly in the professional services world, it's even more true than other businesses. But at the end of the day, most people, including me, just sort of plow through it and don't think about it systematically. Don't think about techniques and processes that ultimately can make teams more successful. So I'm going to show you some of the things that I've learned over the years, and Barry and Chris will tell you I don't do most of these things, but at least they look good on PowerPoint. I love quotes. Teamwork is, this is Andrew Carnegie, a mildly successful guy in the previous century or so. Teamwork is the ability to work together towards a common vision, the ability to direct individual accomplishments towards organizational objectives. And the last sentence is the one that really resonates with me. It's the fuel that allows common people to obtain uncommon results. Talent wins a game, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships, by Mr. Jordan. Never doubt, this is another one that I love, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. If you want to walk quickly, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk with others, which is an African proverb. And these capture, in a nice way, the thing we all know about teams, which is as talented as any one of us may be, or someone we have on our team, when you get a group of people aligned towards a common goal, the results can be astounding. And an even more talented group of individuals acting individually will usually get their butts kicked. And while I don't know a thing about sports, I did start NC State in 1983, which was probably the basketball team was probably one of the greatest demonstrations of a bunch of what I call mutts playing together brilliantly as a team and winning the championship. I think it's the last championship game I watched. But that is a great story. So the one thing, there's all these studies, and my wife tells me that one day I'm going to finally acknowledge my true destiny in life and become a professor, which actually I find appealing, and thank you for attending my class today. So if you look at a lot of the academic studies on how the trends in companies, there's a growing amount that focus that a customer experience, the Apple story, is a profound game changer competitively, but the one that's always been true, and we all know intuitively, is people. And so I coined a funny phrase here, which is VTPs, very talented people. So the rest of my presentation this morning is going to be about VTPs. If you haven't heard the term before, it's because I made it up, and you'll probably never hear it again. But it makes the slides more succinct. So this is a field guide to VTPs. We're going to talk about 5 things. The DNA of a VTP. Which types of VTPs do you need on your team, which is not as obvious as it may seem. The challenges of finding these people, which is extraordinarily hard. Because guess what? If there's someone who's really a rock star, they're probably employed and not looking to join your company immediately. So how do you find, if you actually find one of these people, and they're hard to find, how do you know if they're going to fit with your company? And then I think the part I'm going to focus the most on is how do you actually keep them? These are very, very, very hard people to keep happy. High maintenance is a term that's not flattering, but probably true about a lot of the VTPs I know. So the DNA of a VTP, I wish I had a clicker. In my 30 years of doing this, one of the most common traits that I've seen and I interview for is intelligence. And it's amazing all the forms that it comes in, but I've found more consistently than anything else in dynamic businesses, which most of us are in, intelligence, more than most any other attribute of a VTP, will define their success. But there's some others. I like GE's 4 E's, the energy and the ability to energize others, which are 2 different elements, the edge to make tough decisions and the ability to execute. Self-motivated. It is vastly different. Very talented people can get a lot done, but the ones that will make the biggest difference are the ones that actually figure out how to do it on their own. And they tend to be called things like leaders, people that wake up in the morning, know how to get stuff done, and in fact, in many cases, don't even like being told how to do it. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. They are generating their own results is the highest form of reward. One of the interesting things about working at IBM is that we are a gigantic company, 450,000 people, believe it or not. And we have all these conversations about pay and how much are we paying relative to market. And while that's a very important element, and you have to, if your pay is too low, you're going to lose a lot of people's engagement. It isn't even in the top 3 by almost any study ever. But yet, in large companies, that becomes the main way that executives think they're motivating people. And in fact, the best people you want are the ones that are self-motivated, and as long as they're paid enough and paid properly, the money really doesn't matter. I told somewhat frustrated some of my colleagues at IBM, I said, if you're going to give these raises to these people, which is awesome, by the way, but last I checked, they all thought they were getting paid relatively well. If I can just take that money and put it towards, say, like buying pizza at company lunches so we can learn something, but they don't do that. And so that money was in that bucket and not in this bucket. And some of you work at large companies, you know what that's like. And it's actually, just whatever, everyone asks me all the time, I actually don't have any big philosophical problems with it because it's not my company to run. But it is my aspiration to try to make a dent at IBM and see if we can open up their eyes to some of these things. The fourth thing I put here is the most subtle and one of the most important. And every couple of years I step back and think, what are the characteristics of the most successful people that I work with? And I have come to conclude that self-awareness is perhaps the most powerful tool. Now, to be clear, I think the most successful people in business have no self-awareness, but they are these iconic leaders that fall into good fortune in the right time and end up becoming incredibly successful, and partially because they are not self-aware, because they're narcissists, which is a classic leader personality trait. But for the rest of us that have to slog it out and actually build our careers and don't have a chance to fly in our private planes as billionaires, self-awareness is the largest single trait that I look for in people. And what it does is it allows for what I call self-correction. And it's probably never happened to any of you guys, but once in a while your business is running along and you just hit a wall. Or you're in life and something really throws you a curveball. And the majority of companies, the majority of people start to get into a spiral. You stress over it, whether it's a personal item or an issue with your business, you get fixated on it. It starts to affect the mood and attitude of the business. It starts to affect the people. And I have found that there's a very rare set of people who can self-correct. It's somewhere in there they can find within themselves the ability to say, this really sucks, I know I'm depressed, I know I'm frustrated, I know I'm externalizing it, but somehow I'm going to find the way to redirect my energies towards something positive. This is extraordinary. And something I've always thought that I was pretty good at. And then about 3 months ago, one of our executives came to me and said, Bill, you're really externalizing your frustration with this, and that's not your job. And we look to you not just to be Pollyanna and positive, but to help us all realize the opportunities and focus on the positives. And you're doing less of that than I've ever seen you do. And so I didn't self-correct. I needed a little bit of an ignition, but then I think I was able to get it back there. But part of self-correction is simply being open to it. When I asked my 14-year-old son, who was walking around like this the other day, and I said, what's wrong? He says, nothing, which is the opposite of self-correction. But he's a 14-year-old boy, and they're wired that way. So what kind of VTPs do you need? I can't stress this enough. We try to generalize what an excellent team member, colleague, executive manager looks like, and I will strongly state that it depends entirely on your context. So most of you are larger companies. Some of you are hyper-growth companies. Congrats to Financial Force for raising $110 million yesterday, or announcing it. It's a huge accomplishment. And so the kind of people that you need vary dramatically. If you're at a very young company, some of you are, you want all the people to be generalists. You want somebody that says, I know I'm pretty technical, I've got some management experience, I can read a P&L, I can sell. But when you get to a larger company, you say, I really don't want my sellers to be able to read a P&L because I want them to be the best sellers ever, and I want them to have done nothing but sell. And or programmers. I really could care less if this programmer is a great salesperson because I want the best programmer I can get, and that's all they're going to do for me. So the kinds of talent that you need varies, and it's an obvious point. I mean, hopefully it's really obvious, but you'd be shocked at how often in any company where sort of the HR and the executives just start looking for some generic fit. Another dimension that's important is the yin and yang. I've found, and there's actually academic research on this, that the myth of the perfect executive doesn't usually true up. And in most cases, Dell's a good example, was famous. There's articles about Michael Dell as the iconic leader, but it was Rollins who was behind the scenes. They actually shared an office, and the two of them together were able to create an amazing business, right? And not to do sunshine and daisies and rainbows, but at Silverpop, it's me and Schnur. And so if you want to know the opposite of Nussey, meet Schnur, right? And if you want to know the opposite of Schnur, meet Nussey. And somehow we actually manage not to kill each other, and when we do that, we create, as you guys probably have, that if you meet somebody in the community that you're really enthralled with, that has the kind of character and talents that you want, throwing money at them, A, usually doesn't work, and B, if they respond to it, they often don't turn out to be the people you want. So capturing these really talented people has less to do with money certainly less to do with current compensation than a lot of the conventional thinking would suggest. Equity, that's actually different, I found. People that have a chance to get equity, that's a longer term, it's a completely different kind of incentive for any of us. So I want to be clear, I'm talking mostly about salary and commission. So the challenge about VTPs is that their primary motivation is to actually grow their careers. And one of the things they look for is to work for people smarter than themselves. And this kind of flies in the face of the adage, which I've always thought was silly, was that always hire people smarter than you. Because the problem with people smarter than me is they don't want to work for me. And at least they don't want to work for me just because they're smarter than me. So there's a balance there that I think, to me, the ultimate thing about this set of really talented people, I've coined another phrase, is the VVTP, which is the very, very talented people. And that's the path that this kind of personality wants to follow. If you are in your company, in your role, perhaps you as a manager or as a leader, are a path for these people to get further in their career, that is the single most compelling reason they'll come to work for you. And ironically, and Silverpop's as guilty of this as any company, and IBM is very guilty of this, is that we tend to take our VTPs for granted when we have them. And we tend to invest in them less, and we don't work as hard as we should and could to keep their worlds dynamic. And so they get itchy. And that's why when Silverpop got acquired by IBM, the world knows that, and all of our phones lit up. Hey, you don't want to work at IBM, you want to come work for us, and you want to do this new thing. And many of you have experienced that in various forms. So how do we recruit these people? A couple thoughts. The single best place to find VTPs is existing VTPs. So if you know some really talented people, they probably know the people you want to hire. And by the way, they don't have to work at your company. There's a whole bunch of VTPs in this room, and you guys may not be interested in working for a particular company, but there's a very, very good bet that you know somebody who may be in the market, who may be looking. So there is no better source to mine and find these people than people that are like them. So if you met someone that impresses you, they might know somebody that you want to hire. To my earlier point, one of the most powerful kinds of VTPs is when you bring in somebody who's a junior VTP, hasn't had a chance to prove themselves at the scale they feel they're able to, and to give them a chance to go do that. And the amazing element of that is not only did they become a full-fledged VTP within the value system and goals of your organization, but in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, there's a reciprocated loyalty for giving them a chance. And I've personally had that experience. And when I came to IXL, I was very early in my career, and Bert Ellis, who ran IXL famously, if any of you have met or seen him speak, he's an amazing entrepreneur, an interesting personality, but an amazing entrepreneur. And he gave me a chance to do something that I certainly wasn't ready for. I'll talk about it in a minute, but he did one of the most magical things you can do to any VTP, which is he gave me enough rope to hang myself. He let me fail. And when I had that latitude, I pushed harder, I dug deeper, and I found more creativity than I could have ever done if I was simply waiting for him to tell me what to do. And it worked. And so I learned more in those couple of years than I've done at any other point in my career. Like I said earlier, the most attractive thing to VTPs is VTPs. If you want to be inspired, work with people that are inspired. If you want to build your talent, work with talented people. So think about, I'll talk about this a few times, but one of the things, and the best way to attract and find these people is to take your best people and encourage them to go into the market and to participate and be active parts of the communities in which you may want to hire from. And this is something I'm talking to IBM about at the highest levels, because IBM is one of the largest employers in Georgia, and my perception is we're largely absent from the community. We don't sit on tons of boards. We don't sponsor tons of events. I don't think anyone at IBM has ever seen a mug with IBM on it. And so that's just not the way we're wired as a company. And I understand why, but I think it's an opportunity for us, because you've heard the term, it's a talent war. And the really great talented people that probably would love working at IBM won't find the company, won't think about the company. I mean, I don't think my boss is listening in on this, but I can pretty much assure you that had I been on the market, I would not have applied to IBM. But on the other hand, and I wouldn't have applied to some of your other companies either, but I have learned a ton working at the company, and I'm very, very excited, and this is a great step in my career. I wouldn't have guessed it. And it was an interesting path where, I sat down with Barry and Chris and our colleagues and said, guess what, guys, we have a new employer. So we didn't have a choice. None of us had a choice in the matter. Obviously, we didn't have to sell the company, but ultimately we just ended up there. And I think a lot of people at Silverpop are going to really enjoy it. And if we go out 10 or 15 years, you're going to see a huge percentage of Silverpoppers at IBM. But let's just say they paid an awful lot per person, a lot more than typical recruiting fees to get us. And, but I think a lot of them would have enjoyed it had they had the opportunity, but IBM, it doesn't play that visible role in the community currently. Man, I remember walking down the street in New York City years ago with one of these guys that worked for me at IXL. We were so big and grew so fast, I didn't get a chance to know a lot of the people in the process. And we had this curmudgeon-y guy running New York for us. And he and I were walking from one meeting to another. We had a couple buildings. And I said, well, how come you're not hiring? And he said, HR is not delivering me good people. I looked at him and said, what do you mean HR? He said, well, I need HR to hire the people. I said, HR doesn't hire people, you hire people. He goes, I don't have time to hire people. I said, HR's got to give me bring them on board and bring them to speed and put them on my team. And I looked at him and I said, you don't understand. You have no other priority other than, this is a professional services firm, you have no other priority than to hire extraordinary people. That's not the number one thing you're spending your time on in the company at the stage we're at, then you're totally missing the point. And he vehemently disagreed with me and was gone 3 or 4 weeks later. He opted out because he realized that we weren't going to agree. He didn't realize he was wrong, but he realized we weren't going to agree. And I love Steve Jobs. And I actually have tried to find the absolute attribution of this very famous saying, which is A players hire A players and B players hire C players. And Steve Jobs seems to be the best bet. But it's actually Guy Kawasaki who invented the Mac, who attributes that to Steve Jobs. And it goes further to say that C players hire D players, and that's how you get the bozo explosion, which does sound a lot like something Steve Jobs would say. And so as soon as you let down the bar on the quality of people, the depth of their character, it can tend to start a vicious cycle. And the next thing you know, you wake up a couple of years later and you've got a company or an organization or a division that is one they're not proud of. And there's a lot of good and bad things you can say about Silverpop, but one of the things I am really proud of is that we have a really high concentration of people that act with character. Now, I wish I could say it's because we hired everyone right and we did everything, but it was more of an attrition thing in the sense that it's like an organ transplant rejection. If you join our company when we were independent and you're kind of a dork, it's sort of like a mirror held up to you every day, you're a dork, get with the program. Because when the concentration is high enough of really well-intentioned people of high character, someone who doesn't have that stands out like a sore thumb, and it really, there's a community rejection. It's the only time in my career I've actually seen it. And again, it's not something because we did it by design, it's just that it took 14 years to get to our size, and so slowly we just, people that didn't want to be there left, and it worked out. But it's one of the things that I'm most proud of in our company, which I think we struggled with, and I got into big arguments with our head of HR about at Silverpop. When you have these really extraordinary candidates, there's lots of people, you need lots of roles, but there's a subset of people that are going to be really hard to hire. And these are people that you need to treat differently. You need to handle them with the concierge, white glove kind of process. Even if you're going to talk to 5 of them and only hire 1, they need to be treated differently. And if there's one thing that makes VTPs excited to work with you is they feel they're being treated differently. And the worst thing you can do to a VTP is make sure you're going out of your way to tell them you're treating them the same as everybody else. And this was very hard for me to get my head around. I'm wired, I was an engineer by wiring in the early part of my career, so I have this fundamental notion that we should be fair to everybody. And I have to fight it. And I remember we hired a consultant, Gunjan Doshi, came in years ago, and he was helping us become agile. And we did a great job of turning our development organization to an agile one. And he had a wrap-up, and he sat down with me, and he said, who's your best programmer? And it was known, and I mentioned the guy's name. And he said, who's your worst programmer? It was also known. And I said, so what's the point? He says, this is the difference in their pay. It's really small. He said, if your best programmer isn't making twice what your worst programmer is, then you're not going to keep your best programmers, and you're not going to incent your worst programmers to leave. And it hit me really hard. And we ultimately did not end up actioning that in a very large way, because there's really important reasons, to be fair. Legally, you want to make sure that you have a track record of demonstrating processes that make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity, which is really important. So somewhere in there, it's very challenging, and this is something IBM wrestles with at a level that's few of us will ever have to deal with. But how do you create policies that are not only fair within the Silverpop organization, but across 170 countries in which we operate? How do you make sure that it's ethical and right? How do you help create opportunities for people in countries where maybe they'd be disadvantaged? So it's a balance. But I would tell you that if you want to keep extraordinary people, they need to feel like their opportunities are unique. So if you found a VTP and you're sourced them, and however, networking, recruiting ads, whatever you've done, and they look like they're really promising, how do you know they're for you? I'm a huge believer in this. You need to meet people on a personal level. And sometimes this is un-PC, and you got to be very careful about it. But spending time, so I will, for example, my thing is to go to lunch with people. Let's get outside of the office. Let's have more than a prescribed hour. Let's just catch up, right? Sometimes have dinner. Sometimes have a glass of wine. And again, you have to be very careful with these things, particularly in a very large conservative company like IBM. But I really believe that if you want to get to know somebody, it's got to be outside of that 1 hour slotted meeting where you're clearly the interviewer and they're the interviewee. And again, I'm learning what's acceptable and not, but prior to becoming part of IBM, the single best way to understand someone is to meet their spouse or their significant other or anyone that they're really close to. If you want to see somebody, simultaneously see the reflection of who they are and the people that they care about. And I have found when I'm deciding to take a job, meeting the spouse of the person I might work for, the significant other, when I'm meeting people, bringing on executives to the company, I like to meet the people that are most important to them as part of the process. And usually it's mutual. There's usually a strong sense that you want to know somebody more than just what they show up and what their resume looks like. I cannot stress common values enough. This is something that I didn't really focus on until I joined Silverpop, so my third company. And this is something you do if you are in a position to lead an organization, a division, or a region, and you want to look for people with common values. And the best people around you are people that share your values but have very different styles and personalities. So values would be things like the customer really comes first, not just the customer comes first, but the customer really comes first. How far are you willing to go to talk to customers? So for example, I get very few, but every time a customer complains to me about something, I respond. And I feel like that's a value that if they feel strongly enough to talk to me, then I'm going to talk to them. And about 80% of them are people that tend to complain about everything and probably yell at the toll booth person when they're giving them money for not taking the money fast enough. But in all cases, that's a value of mine, and we need to bend over backwards for customers. Now, and ultimately, if we have a customer who's too crazy, we have fired many, many customers at Silverpop, and we will continue to. But common values on how do you feel about competitors? Are you a die effing competitors? They're scumbags, or are you like it's a win-win? And these are all values that you want to match against, and ideally with diverse styles, and then you have an unbeatable team. This was really, really hard for me. And I don't think I'm in a position to do this at IBM. But if you are in a position to filter for the people you hire for the ones that you like, then I strongly encourage you to try. We have to work together every single day, all of us and our colleagues. We have incredibly challenging, epically challenging things in front of us. We have politics, we have angry customers, we have budgets, we have all these things. And if you ultimately have to find the stamina and the courage to get through this, it helps a lot if you like the people you work with. And for the larger part of my career, I filtered more for impressive resumes or more for people who's maybe had a skill set that was particularly critical And as I got further through this, and this turned from gray to white, I started looking for people I liked. Not anywhere near the top 3, but once I was starting to narrow people down to the ones that were great potential candidates, I looked for people I liked. And one of the things that happened that was amazing, I woke up one day and I realized 2 things. First of all, my stress levels in my job are a lot less. And second of all, because of that, I think I was doing a much better job. And because I was looking forward to meetings, and I was looking forward to coming to work. And one thing I got to tell you about IBM is that I really like the people at this company. I didn't expect to, I didn't care, it wasn't something I would think about, right? And there's obviously some bozos, but the number of people that I actually enjoy working with at IBM shocks me, and it's one of the reasons that I'm excited to be part of the company right now. You cannot interview people enough. It's a story, Chris Sullivan's classic, and his team, he hires some of the strongest people in our company. We interview the crap out of people. And I mean, when we were smaller, I used to take people to breakfast or lunch, the new employees, and the refrain I'd hear all the time is, man, it's hard to get a job here. I had to interview for 6 weeks. I met 15 people. I walked into a room with 10 people in the room, if you're a programmer, and I had to come back 3 different times for 4 interviews each time. And it is, not everyone wants to do that. It's definitely inefficient. We've had a lot of complaints about it takes too much of the manager and employees' time to interview all these people. But you will learn more about your candidates. You will learn if you like them. You'll learn if there's a cultural and values fit. They'll be engaged to a level. They'll be more excited about you if they join. It is a really powerful commitment. So, and if you're a VTP, trying to hire a VTP, and they get this kind of attention, they get to meet these kind of people, this diversity of your company, then they're more inclined to say yes to you than the other offer they're going to get. I would say anecdotally that most of the time we are not the highest paying offer for people to join, but I think we still get our disproportionate, more than our proportionate share, because people want to be part of our organization because of the culture and the people. And reference checks. Man, floss your teeth, wear sunscreen, and always, always, always do your reference checks. You spend 6 hours with somebody, and you know them inside and out. You get their entire, you know their history. You feel like you're best friends for life. So why in the world? It's almost like I don't trust you to do a reference check. It's amazing. When I worked at Greylock, I learned a lot of fundamental lessons. And there was an entrepreneur that I had, who's actually quite famous now, very controversially famous. And I had worked for 6 months to tee it up, and he had decided he would take his money from us. And I was earlier in my career, this was huge. And I went to the partnership and I said, guys, look, we're gonna fund this guy. And they said, awesome, this business idea, everything's stellar. They said, just do the reference checks. I said, we need to move now. This is the iron's hot, we got to strike. And they said, always do reference checks. So, I got the guys' references, they were awesome. And then as always, we came up with 1 or 2 other reference checks. And I remember calling up another reference, and I told the guy I was going to call this, I told the person we were thinking of funding, we're going to call this other guy you worked with. And so I called that person, and I said, can you give me, I know you guys work together, love your thoughts. Silence. I would never work with that guy again. I was like, what? He told me it'd be okay to talk to. Yeah, I'm not surprised. And I said, so what's going on? And he explained it to me, and the light bulb went off. I could completely see the things I was missing about this guy's personality. And we didn't fund the company, and it was a disaster. It got funded because it was a great idea, but the whole company blew up. And that was a powerful lesson for me, for always do your reference checks. So some people collect stamps, and some people collect teacups. I collect interview questions. And so I've been writing them down since I was in my 20s. None of them are really awesome, but I love them. And actually the one I ask the most often isn't here, which I'll tell you in a second. But one of the best questions, you want to get somebody to explain their self-perception of their weaknesses in a way that is more genuine. So asking somebody, what's your biggest weakness, is a really lame question. And the lame answer is, I work too hard. So I like this one because I actually say, if I were to call Not what would they say, but if I were to call someone from your last job, because if the interviewee is thinking, maybe they know someone in my last job, I better be honest. Now, if I were to call someone from your last job and find your biggest detractor, what would they say about you? And that elicits the most honest answers and the most insightful answers. What's your largest professional accomplishment? This will tell you a lot about the kind of person that you're talking to. And they'll tell you about delivering the big deal, or finishing the big project, or saving the day at the company, right? And this will just tell you about how people are wired. And you think about your own answer to that question, it'll tell you a lot about who you are. Describe the biggest mistake. This is also telling for different reasons. And you can tell, most of us are been around long enough, you can tell when someone's not telling you the truth. So you'll see a lot of truthful body language, like the little eye shifting, looking at the ground, the feet shuffling. Yeah, I missed a quarter once, but it wasn't really my fault because the product shipped late and things like that. Okay, got it. Writing that down. That's your biggest mistake. This is the one I've only started using the last couple of years, and talking about a surprised, awkward moment. Okay, so tell me why. I'm really excited you're here to talk to us. I think it's potentially a great fit. Why are you going to leave your current company? Even if it's benign reasons, people often, and it elicits really interesting answers. Some of the people that work at Silverpop have done this. Do you guys do this, the presentations? Every consultant. This is, so if you've got people that are really critical, the dimensionality of their skills is something you just can't be wrong on, ask them to make a presentation. This is controversial because some people walk away. Some interviewees walk away. I'm not going to spend 5 hours or 10 hours preparing something. I don't want to be put in this position. The other guys want me badly enough. They're just made me an offer. You're going to make me give a presentation. So I'm not saying this is something you should use all the time. But think hard about it as a technique. If you have a critical hire that you've got to get right, this will tell you a lot about how committed they are to you. It'll actually give you the only real-world test you could possibly have of whether or not they can do what you need, think the way you need them to think. I've sat through several presentations by people that are interested in working at the company, that their executive hiring them has asked them to make a presentation, and it works. If you tee it up, it will work, and you will learn about the person you're going to hire better than any other method there is. Some reference questions. The easy one, which is the only one you really need to ask. If you only ask one reference question, is it, would you work with this person again? And it's like a judo trick, right? It's a simple. It's like the net promoter score. It's a very simple question. Rank from 1 to 10. Would you recommend this company? And what I love about it is that a simple answer elicits so many levels of peeling the onion. It opens up so many dimensions. And then the follow-on one is, well, why aren't you working with them now? Because honestly, if you were to call me, I don't give a lot of references on average, other than but if it's someone I know really well who's asked for the reference about someone that worked for one of the companies I've worked at, sometimes I'll do it, and I want to be nice. And so if they're good, they ask me, well, why aren't you working with them now? And that's caught me a few times. They weren't right for the job they had at the time, but they'd be great for your job. And so I use it, and I've used it and it's been used on me. Southwest Airlines says, what's the best working environment? What kind of boss does this person thrive with? If you've worked with a person in the past, Mr. Reference, Mrs. Reference, what kind of managers did you see them succeed with? What kind of managers did they fail with? The policies of your company, did they like the autonomy? Were they struggling with it, et cetera, et cetera? And then what situation, Amazon asks everybody and references, what situation would you not put somebody in? And it's a very open-ended question. It's one of those things, if you think hard about it, it actually creates really great answers. All right, this is the one I focus on, and this is the hardest part. How do you keep an extraordinary team together? It is really hard to find VTPs. It is even harder to hire them and make sure they're the right ones. But when you get them together and it works, you have just created the easiest job for recruiters everywhere in your community, right? Because Silverpop had enough success that in some areas, some hiring areas in town, if you worked at Silverpop, that was a positive thing because we'd created a good company. And so the fact that you succeed at all this means that the people that are on your team actually are harder to keep than ever. And so how do you keep them? No easy answers, but Moss Cantor, who's a very well-regarded Harvard Business School professor, says, for your best people, don't focus on tomorrow's IPO, but today's OPI, opportunity for positive impact. And it's pithy, cute way to say it, but the lady that invented the Net Promoter Score was interviewed a couple years ago, and asked the question, what do you think is the best way to keep extraordinary employees? And she said, let them deliver 10 NPS scores to your customers. And whether it's a person taking a telephone call or a board of directors managing a CEO, getting out of the way and letting them giving them the flexibility, the role definition, the charter, and the resources to make a really positive impact is the number one thing you can do for talented people, because that's what they want. Really talented people don't look at what they're getting paid today past a certain threshold, because what they're doing is building their skill sets so they can make a bigger impact in 10 years or thinking out. When I sold Silverpop, the refrain everywhere was, of course you're going to retire now or maybe become a venture capitalist. No interest in that for whatever it's worth. And I was speaking to a group of Silicon Valley CEOs about 3 months ago out in Silicon Valley, and taking Q&A, hey Bill, when are you going to quit, and what kind of company are you going to start? And it had this epiphany on the stage, and I answered what became now the charter for this point in my career, which is I said, IBM is this incredibly iconic company that has been around for 100 years. And if you know anything about the company, it's at another one of its pivotal points. IBM would tell you that it's reinvented itself more times than any company in American business history. And it's at another one of those points. Some people in the stock market say that it's struggling and it's going to fail and become irrelevant. Others say that it has so much fundamental talent, motivation, and technology that it can't help but succeed. And I said, I've always measured my career by my ability to make an impact. Imagine if even in a small way I can make an impact in a company that's $100 billion at a point of great transformation. Now that's interesting to me. And so that's what motivates me. And not everyone's like that. In fact, maybe very few people are like that. But I've always been motivated. I think it's less common when you're further through your career like I am, but the opportunity to make a real impact is the single most motivating thing I've seen. My son is in college, and he's going to sign up for co-op. And he was interviewing with a company that wanted to hire him. And he's a talented kid, and they actually needed some of the stuff he could do. And he said he would only take the job. He's going to work at a young growth company. And he said only take the job if they'd let him sit in on a board meeting or two. And I thought that was really interesting, and let him go on sales calls. Now he's a programmer. And that's the job he's getting hired for. And I went to my wife, I said, yes, yes, because he wants to make an impact, right? He knows he can be a good programmer for them, but there's many of those. He wants to be able to make an impact, and to make an impact, he needs to learn. And he's choosing this particular company because they said, yes, we'll let you sit in on a board meeting or two, we'll let you go to some sales calls. And that's, by the way, he's getting paid half of what the average is. He's researched online that co-ops get paid. So if he were to go to traditional co-op like a Lockheed Martin or a large company where engineering co-ops tend to go, he would have been paid twice as much. And this is, hopefully we've steered him right, but it was unprompted. He didn't ask for my opinion on this stuff. And so it works. We'll see where he is in 20 or 30 years, but I'm hopeful. Slow to hire, quick to fire. Enough said. By the way, I'm terrible at that. But it's still true. The founder's paradox. This is one that I love to talk about for growth companies. So imagine if you're a founder, or more likely, or more commonly, if you're like most of us that build professional careers, you're joining a company to assist a founder to get to where the founder's vision could go. Now, think about what founders are awesome at. They are the masters of ignoring reality, because every single person is going to tell the founder of the company that their idea is not going to work, they don't have the resources, and so that founder has a stoicism and a vision that is so powerful that they're willing to plow forward when someone like me would just probably give up and say it's not going to work. Everybody says it's not going to work. So they are, and by the way, when it does work and they're large enough to bring you in to help them, they know they were right. They know that ignoring input and ignoring status quo is the right thing to do. Now the trouble is that when the company gets larger, you can't ignore everything anymore. You actually have to work with the team. You have to actually take input. And so founders have this nasty habit of blowing up spectacularly in their companies. And in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a bit of a shift where founders, Mark Zuckerberg being the king of this, we want the founder to remain in their position. But it takes an extraordinary amount of work, and very few companies can get away with that. Most companies need to move beyond the founder. The founder needs to make room for an executive team to work with him or her. But boy, I tell you, I've been on dozens of boards and funded lots of companies, and this is the defining thing of growth companies, is navigating founders.
Taking as private.
Yes.
He has a very different perspective than as a company.
Michael Dell is one of America's greatest business leaders. You're privileged to work with him, and he's, I'm sure there will be hundreds of case studies on what he has done from the very beginning. I mean, inventing negative, working capital costs. Actually generating cash from working capital is the first company in the world to do that at scale, right? The dual teaming with Rollins. I mean, and just so many unique business models were born out of Dell, and then taking one of the largest companies in the world private. Whew. So I've only met him a few times, but you're lucky to be part of that. I'm sure it's also a pain. The magic of small wins. Another thing that I wish we did a better job at, and IBM is particularly not good at. There's a ton of psychology. There's a great book by Teresa Mabile called The Progress Principle, and we had Tony Hsieh speak at our customer conference a few years ago, and he made the same point. He said, and this is I think this is really true for professional service firms, and you've got to be in a position to actually do this, and most HR departments won't let you do it, but letting you build tiny incremental role improvements. So at Zappos, you have they have titles like you're a junior assistant analyst, and then you're an assistant analyst, and then you're a senior assistant analyst, and then you're a junior analyst, and then basically every 6 or 12 months you can expect a promotion. What Teresa Mabile would say, one of my favorite professors from HBS, would say that you need to build really incremental milestones. And so 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this was a radical idea, and this is what agile programming is. This is a revolution in how we think about running businesses. We're willing to step back from mega goals and build our businesses incrementally. And by the way, that creates incredible agility, flexibility, but much more importantly, it creates a psychology with very talented people that gets them excited and engaged. They want to know they're making progress. A user manager sets the system up so that they're in a position to see incremental progress. They will be engaged to a level that's hard to achieve any other way. All right. Have fun. This is, I would say, my number one weakness as a leader. People laugh when I say this, but I'm not actually a very fun person. I mean, I'm not like a bore or a jerk, I hope. But, I'm not, I'm the guy, when the cocktail party starts, I'm looking at the door. And I'm not really social, and so I've never, I'm very focused. So at Silverpop, one of the things I could have done so much of a better job at, and I love companies that do this well, is they take the wins. We just killed the quarter, we just shipped the product, and they have a huge party. Now, we did this a little bit at Silverpop, but not nearly to the degree we should. And IBM does it a lot less. Because it costs money, and it takes time, and you just, and by the time you just ship the product, the customers are screaming for the next one, and you just get caught up in this treadmill of constantly going and never stepping back to say, yes! And it's simple to do, it doesn't cost much money, it's a simple leadership thing to do, and maybe even your immediate team doesn't feel that way because they're on the treadmill with you, but when you step back, you get to the broader team, when you have that conference call with the 60 people across the region that you manage and you point out the successes in a really emotive way, you send a gift out to the person that pulled it off, any of these things. This stuff is so powerful, and it provides that recognition mechanism for VTPs. So get together outside of work. That is one thing I actually do. I'm a huge believer that when we are doing planning and operations management stuff, we get off site, and it's kind of funny. I try to do it outside of Atlanta so that you can't go home to your family. You have to go back to the hotel, and inevitably everyone ends up in the lobby or at the bar, and they sit around until 1 o'clock in the morning shooting the bull. And my strong experience is the bonds that form in those moments are the most powerful bonds, period. Because every day you work together with people, particularly really talented, driven people, there's a reason to be reminded that they're jerks and they're in the way of your success. They're not delivering what you need. They're asking you for impossible things, and you can quickly build a worldview of your colleagues that it's about contention and strife, right? But as soon as you get, and there's one of our executives that I'm not going to name, who's quite famous, that he's very difficult to work with, but when you get with him outside of work, he's one of the most charming people. And if it wasn't for those kinds of meetings, people wouldn't realize what a great guy Jim is. And wrapping it up, just a few more. This is one that I remind myself of all the time. You don't manage people's activities, especially really talented people. Manage their outcomes, manage their results. And it's hard, right? Because it's really clear to me, some project or some goal, what the people on the team need to do next. It's actually quite a bit harder for me to frame it in a way that gives them the latitude and autonomy to go after it the way they want. It's extra work. But if you do it that way, VTPs really, really roll their sleeves up and go get it done. Give them the autonomy and ownership. If you let the people on your team know they can survive failure, that failure is not the end of their career, it's not a permanent black mark, and in fact, there are company cultures that do this so well that failure is a form of success. When I worked at Greylock, they would look for entrepreneurs that had huge failures, because actually, one of my favorite stories is I was interviewing this gentleman, Jim, to work at our company, and he's incredibly blunt, and I love that about him. And I knew that I wanted to work with him, and he's one of our top folks and one of our best folks. I asked him, because I've been trying to recruit him when I was at IXL, and he's reputed to be one of the best in the Southeast at what he does. And he wouldn't even return my phone calls. And so here I show up at Silverpop, and the employees were saying, this guy's interested in working here. And I said, oh, fantastic, I know this guy. So I went to breakfast with him, and I said, I'm really excited you're interested in the company. I've heard fantastic things about you. You've got a good reputation. I said, so I just have to ask, why wouldn't you work at IXL? Why wouldn't you even talk to me about working at IXL? And at this point, IXL, if you know anything about the company, we peaked, and then and I came over to Silverpop, the company was kind of blowing up. And he looks at me and says, well, do I need to explain it? I said, okay. And I said, I love that. I love his frankness. And he said, and talking about complementary personalities. And I said, so why will you work for me now? Why would you consider it? And I've told the story countless times. He said, normally I won't work for someone as young as you, but you've made more mistakes in your career than anyone your age, and so I know you've learned something. And he's many years older than me, actually. Since he's not here, he's much older than me. He's like a really old guy. And so, because I've been in positions, the board of IXL let me take huge risks, and we did some spectacular things and had some spectacular failures. But that got me engaged, and I try to do the same thing at Silverpop. And failures, people that have failed spectacularly are often the wisest, most self-aware, successful people for whatever they try next. Boy, do you need to inspire people to a greater cause. We're not here, profits are great, customer success is great, but we're here to change the world. One of the company that does it better than anyone is Salesforce.com, right? The 111, 1% of their profits go to charity, 1% of their equity goes to charity. Mark Benioff, who I've gotten to know pretty well over the years, a very interesting personality, but he has done an amazing job of framing Salesforce.com in the broader context. It used to be we're going to take on Microsoft, back when that was something that you should be proud of. And and they still in the lobby. As I'm sure many of you have been in the lobby of Salesforce. They have the old the no software logo they made famous going after Microsoft. But but then also giving money away and having helping. I don't want to get into politics, but you guys may have read he's going after the Indiana government, and he's pulling Salesforce out of Indiana because Indiana passed a law signed by the governor that gives the business people a little more latitude on what's equal rights or not. And his view is that technology workers tend more often to be alternative lifestyles, and it's actually it's non-defensible in Indiana to choose not to hire somebody. So Mark Benioff is going on a crusade against Indiana. Crusade. It's all over the news. It's in New York Times. It's crazy. And now, whether you agree with his politics or not isn't the point. People love a leader that is so passionate that he's here for a bigger cause. And it's also really annoying, but it is definitely never boring. Wrapping it up, boldly recognize extraordinary contributions. If there are people in your team that have done fantastic work, call them out. And I've always wrestled with that because, well, I know that if this person, there's actually 3 or 4 people that might have helped a lot, and I don't want them to feel bad and they'll inevitably say, well, that was unfair, you pointed to this person. These other people actually did as much or more of the work. The greater sin is not to really call out anybody or call out everybody. One of my favorite movies in the world is The Incredibles, the Pixar movie. And it really wrestles, Pixar movies are unbelievable, right? But it wrestles with the question of, people that are really extraordinary, do you treat them like everybody else? And I can tell you, you can choose whatever you want to do, but if you want to keep VTPs, you better darn well tell them they're special. And if you tell them they're special in front of their peers, they'll love you for life. It's a fact. You can choose to be fair and not step on the toes of the people that may not be as VTP-ish, but I'm telling you that's the thing and I still struggle with it. So, my final slide. When you're thinking about hiring extraordinary people, there is such a gap between what you are an employee and a manager, most of you. And if you were to answer either side of this equation on these key questions, you'd probably answer it consistently incorrectly. As an employee, you would argue that the things that you value the most are A, B, and C, and as a manager, you would say that your employees value completely different things. So this came out a couple years ago, and I found this just to be one of the most intriguing disconnects. Because if I put my manager hat on, I think about these things in the right pretty naturally. I got to make sure I'm paying them correctly. They want to know that their boss is solid. They want to be able to see a clear path to promotion, because people tell me that's really important all the time. But the fact is, when it really comes down to it, if people have autonomy, they can get recognition, they work for someone that inspires them, that's why they stay. And one of the things I want to institutionalize at IBM is to have them recognize they're all about this set right here, and they're not much about this set. And it's hard. This is really hard to do. This is soft, fluffy stuff. It can get you in trouble with, are you being fair to everybody, and equal opportunity, that kind of stuff. So, because that stuff's really important too.
Seniority's not on there, right?
Yeah. Didn't make that list. So, it's been a lot of fun the last couple of years, learning and having the privilege of working with a lot of ETPs. And I have concluded that there is no more powerful competitive weapon than an extraordinary team. There's nothing harder to achieve than an extraordinary team. Time and time again, a well-aligned group of B-plus players will kick the ass of a loose federation of A-pluses. You can get 3 or 4 of the best resumes in the world, but if they don't have leadership, if they're not aligned, they're not coupled, they're not linked at the arms, a bunch of mutts will take them on every time. And I've always referred to Silverpop and the companies that I've worked with, the people, one of the kindest things I say is that we're all mutts. Don't necessarily have a lot of pedigree, don't necessarily come from the biggest name companies, weren't raised in wealthy families, we just scrapped our way to success. And almost all the great successes I've seen were mutts. Steve Jobs is a great example, right? His childhood was one that none of us would want for our children. One of the most iconic and transformative people in our generation. So, and when my kids stumble and they struggle with something in life and they say, oh, this is terrible, I've just had the setback, my heart's crushed, my future is dark, and I say, think back to any great business story, any great leadership story you've ever heard. Find a single one that looked like they showed up, they worked hard, and everything came out fine. Every single story you've ever heard, every single great team you've ever worked with was not defined by its successes, it was defined by its challenges. And so when you're thinking about building an extraordinary team, let people experience that. And you will have the successes that eludes everybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for
Just,
that, Bill.
yeah, just in an hour. Good.
Yeah, we're in good shape. So we've got another half hour on the clock. If anybody needs to leave now, we can. Bill, if you're open.
I'm not leaving it.
maybe we could
Yeah.
open up to a question. You made a comment about working with people you like, reducing the stress, and allowing you to kind of blossom. And it made me think about something that several years ago, I started traveling with the noise-canceling headphones. And what you don't realize is when you're in that tube in the air, there's all this ambient noise that you kind of block out. You don't think about it, but it's bothering you, and it kind of stresses you as you get there. And what I realized traveling with the headphones is I would always arrive much more relaxed and much more focused.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even know what was going on around me. It was this ambient stress level that I'd never even really recognized.
It's a great
until
metaphor.
I blocked it out.
Great metaphor.
And it kind of registered for me. I've been in environments where I didn't like the people as much as I would like to have. And it creates this ambient stress level that affects your ability to be effective at what you do. And then I think back to times where I've worked with a team that I love, and I see that's where not only I've blossomed, but everybody around me has. So I think that's a really important point that you made, and I appreciate you kind of calling that one out.
I agree. It's a great metaphor, airline headphones for distractions. Yes?
I was curious your thoughts on, I've had a number of what I consider really talented individual contributors that really want to have a manager title or want to have people, want to feel like they have a team, and you just know they're not ready yet. And there's this feeling like if they don't get that, they're going to go try to find it somewhere else.
And they do.
And they usually do. And I struggle with that because I've given people that responsibility, and a year later it blows up just like I've expected, potentially even lose some of the people on that team that they're managing because they just can't survive in that environment. But they're really talented people, and you want to try to help them see that they're not quite ready yet, but they don't see it.
Did I mention VTPs or high maintenance? And that's a tension that I think we've all experienced over and over again. And the worst thing you can do to a talented person is put them in a position to fail. So it's easy to mistake the challenge you're discussing or mentioning as one of making that person happy. But I think the greater, more important dimension is whether or not they can be successful, because that's ultimately the thing. One of the things I think we were starting to do pretty well at Silverpop was having very fact-based discussions, more clinical, objective discussions with high achievement-oriented people about where they were at. And one thing IBM actually does a pretty good job of is laying out clear steps. In some cases, not always, but in some cases are clear enough that it keeps people satisfied. And then delivering ultimately if they show certain strength improvements. But I agree with you. There's no easy answer. That's very difficult to navigate, the ambition of your very talented people. And if I think back to the regretted losses we've had at Silverpop over the last 5 years, I don't think pay is even 5% of them. It's inevitably somebody who was typically a manager of 1 or 2 people is now a vice president at a smaller company managing a team of 20 or 30 people. And some of them have been successful, a lot of them haven't.
I'm curious how you manage the difference between kind of your culture at Silverpop and how you bridge that to IBM. I mean, you even gave your story of where you were externalizing it and didn't realize it. You explained kind of what your role is, right? You're preventing your team from being squashed. How do you look at that each day?
Yeah, let me just repeat the question because they're filming this. How do we navigate the cultural differences between IBM and Silverpop? The good news is that IBM and Silverpop culture have shockingly positive consistencies. We are in a great industry, and a lot of the players a lot of the companies that we compete with have been acquired, and a lot of big companies were acquiring, so we had the chance to meet with a lot of those companies, all of whom I'm sure you've heard of. And we would sit in these meetings, and there would be a lot of excitement about how we and Company X could work together if they acquired us to take on the future. But the moment we went into the IBM meeting, and this is true, within about 60 seconds, it was the same group of us every time, we started looking across the table at each other like, these guys are awesome. And it's easy to ignore all the things we have in common with IBM to focus on the things that are clearly different. But IBM is passionate about products and technology, just like Silverpop is. Some of the companies we met with think that the product doesn't really matter. It's all about how you sell and market it, and that is important. But we believe in creating great products. We have, and IBM believes in that as well. So there was a lot more similarities with our cultures, which have made it a little easier.
Well, let me a similar connection with people, but frankly, in a company that big, administration gets in the way, right? And even they're bound and you're bound, and you're kind of swimming against the tide, even though you know it, at the heart of it, you've got the same goals. There's just this inertia you're fighting.
And I don't think that, I entirely agree with that observation, but I wouldn't call that cultural per se. But I understand your question. So Silverpop was probably more bureaucratic than, in my opinion, than a lot of companies our size. So it was actually relatively harder to get stuff done than you'd expect for a 500-person company. And so I think it was less of a culture shock at IBM. That being said, it's a lot harder to get stuff done at IBM. And but when you do get stuff done, it's really a big deal. And for a lot of people, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it might take literally 5 times or 10 times more effort, more consensus driving to get something to move forward. If you want to find $25,000 for a project, it probably takes 10 times more work to get it done at IBM than it would have at Silverpop. Hard in both cases, though. But when you can play on the IBM landscape, for a lot of people, it's worth the trouble. Or it's not, the trouble's not so bad that it makes the successes unfun. We're in a great place within IBM, and we're getting an undue amount of attention, so it could be a lot worse. There's a lot of people I know that work at IBM and experience a different company than we are. But let's make no mistake about it. I would say most of us at Silverpop are really frustrated navigating this. But according to the statistics, our retention rate right now of employees is better than it was before we were acquired. I don't know that that's going to last. I actually think it's going to go up and down. We're small enough that we're going to see anomalous spikes that are unrelated to underlying drivers, but I do think that it is really hard. And the part I play and the role that Barry plays is to, one, help our people step through, take the brunt of some of the bureaucracy and make it a little easier for our people, concierge them through it. The thing I've started doing at our company meetings, which we continue to do and will continue to do forever, or as long as I can foresee, is I point out the positives, which are easy to overlook, right? So one of the things that drives me nuts is that IBM doesn't give free coffee. They are for us. They're going to keep doing that for us, and they're going to continue free snacks and free fruit and all those things that we've always done. But they don't do that I mean, that's just like crazy, right? So there's things of that nature that just make no sense. But there's things that IBM does that are wonderful, and you take them for granted. You know, they're so focused on pay that a lot of people at Silverpop have gotten raises because they want to make sure that they're paid fairly, and those raises never would have happened if we had not gotten acquired. So part of my job is to point out the things that are easy to take for granted so people don't get too focused on a reasonable number of negatives that are apparent every day to all of us. We work for the dumbest company in the history of humanity, get our game face back on, go back out and do our job.
I was just going to add that because we get along with them from a people standpoint, and we do have a good cultural parent, there is a lot of inertia. And I guess I would credit Bill for not being what might be the proverbial acquired CEO and throwing his hands up and being frustrated and saying, you guys are dumb, because they're not dumb, and it is inertia. And Bill's put in an inordinate amount of effort to really work IBM and speak on IBM's terms, using IBM language. And the good news is, over time, they get it, and it's taken a while, but it's paying dividends now, which is great. So I think having that patience and that ability to sort of get on board and help facilitate answers is key. And not everybody has the patience to do that.
You know, we're going to move to the Barfield location. If you guys know IBM, it's over there near 400, and where Internet Security Systems used to be. And when the first time the plan was proposed, it would have been a step down from our wonderful offices over there. And so, we complained and nothing happened. And so then we learned how to talk IBM and make the case in terms that IBM understood. And now we're moving over there, and it's going to be nicer. Millions and millions of dollars that weren't in anyone's budget were created for us to move to a better facility because we understood how to make the case in terms that IBM understood. And that's a leap that a lot of acquired companies don't bother to try to make. Any other questions? Yeah.
Since you're addressing a professional service audience, I think most of us are managing or working on teams that are geographically distributed.
Yes.
Any aspect of managing, retaining BTPs, you think that having those type of teams have a particular challenge? Or?
Yeah, I have one really strong recommendation for you, and I'm telling you, you guys know all this, but it is critical that you get your team together physically a couple times a year for all the reasons I stated. And it is so important that people meet each other, and that the time that you have together is not programmed down to the minute. I typically shoot for 2/3 program time and 1/3 unprogrammed time, so people can just hang out. Some of them are going to go back to the rooms and, play solitaire on their computers, but a number of them are going to hang out, and bonds will be built, and it will just wipe away quarters worth of friction and tension and struggle, because they realize if they're working for you, they're probably all good folks, and they just have, sometimes they need to be reminded of that. So get together physically is really critical. One of the things I would actually love y'all's input on for that question, and I'm struggling with the answer, is should we all be using video conferencing? And there's really strong schools of thought. IBM does not do video conferencing at all. Silverpop is starting to use it within office-to-office stuff, but even for people that work in their home, primarily, they're in their bunny rabbit slippers and their hair sticks up in the morning like mine does, and so they don't want a video conference. I'm curious if you guys have had experiences either way on that.
Yeah, I at my last position, we used Microsoft Link. So everybody had, that was our computers were our phone system, and video conferencing, everything was built in. So it was a fine line because my team was dispersed. I would do one call a week with them, video. Just so that we
Just
could all
one.
get together and see each other. Most calls weren't video, but we wouldn't take it seriously, the video. Somebody would come and I would have a backdrop behind me that was some unique backdrop, or the software would put ears on people, and we would allow those type things to happen. And so people would wear funky T-shirts, stuff like that during the video
That's
call.
great.
And that made it worthwhile. Otherwise, it was, I don't want to be on video. Instead, everybody looked forward to the video call.
I like it. So doing it occasionally, but in a structured, predictable way. I like that. I like that a lot.
And I would add that if you have a new team and you're trying to build that cohesion, having people see people's expressions into the video is very important. Then over time you can reduce that. But I have a funny story. My boss at one of my companies would do video chats, to like a town hall meeting, and one day he was doing a pretty serious chat about the business results, and his wife walked in her house coat, I think it was her nightie, and slippers, and filled up his coffee. And she didn't know he was on the phone. Yeah, he just kept on going. But to me, that sort of lightened the mood, and it showed him as sort of a true person, right?
There's a great commercial, on YouTube of a guy. It's an advertisement, I think, for a video conference system, and this guy's got his earphones on, and he's typing on the computer, and that's all you see in the commercial. And his attractive significant other walks past him and looks at him in a alluring thing, and then she comes out of the other room and she jumps on him. And so you think up until the moment that he's just typing on the computer, and then it turns around and there's a bunch of people in a room in a video conference looking and pointing at him. And so I think there's, and then of course there's the barking dog, which is the bane of all conference calls. But I think that's a great suggestion, and I think doing it sometimes is the right answer rather than all the time. That way it's not too much to ask for it occasionally. That's a great, I'm gonna try that. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just a question on, in terms of, there's a lot of controversy or discussion around how do you rank people? Do you do year-end reviews and these ratings and the stack rank and all this stuff? It's kind of been thrown out, right? And people are looking at new ways of trying to, to acknowledge the performance of a VTP, right? I'm just curious your opinion or thoughts on that, Silverpop versus IBM, just general thoughts.
Boy, that's one of my favorite topics is compensation. And my favorite class is in business school. The number one thing I think about for compensation is that you avoid, indirectly to your question, is that you avoid large stepwise payouts and make them more linear. So commission is a classically good kind of payout because the more you sell incrementally, the more you make. And if there's a couple of big steps, that's fine, but the general approach is incremental good, incremental pay. What you want to avoid is a giant thing where someone's going to make 20% bonus based on this particular number or zero. And that creates a lot of really unnatural acts. So that's probably the driving thing I think about from compensation recognition. So I've thought about the question, that you've outlined for my entire career, and I would tell you, I think IBM's system is the best one I've seen. And they have a soft force ranking, and it's different depending on which division you're in. It's enforced more or less. But everybody gets a 1 is the best, a 3 is the worst, a 2, and then they added a 2+ years later because no one wants to be in the middle, so they invented a 2+, which is, well, it's clearly a hack. It's actually pretty good. And so, because they'll audit it to see the percentage within your teams. I don't know if you notice how it works, but they audit it within our teams, and so the number of 1s and 2s I have, et cetera, and they hold you to it. It's not hard and fast. And then the other interesting part is that in general, if you're on a 3, it just means it's not like General Electric or Microsoft used to be, where you're at the bottom, you're on the way out. But this year at IBM, how to deal with 3s is different than it was last year, and so they give different instructions to the managers and executives how to handle it, depending on the goals they're trying to do as a company, and I like it. And so I think a force ranking that doesn't necessitate immediate action as a result is good. And your very best people end up knowing they're your very best people, which is ultimately more important than being really nice to your least quality performers. It's a good balance. I never liked the GE thing where they force out the bottom. Jack Welch, his book was really, yeah, and he said that it was a great observation. It's true. When you take over a division or a group of people, you're happy to out the people at the bottom of the list. But once that team has been together for a while, the same exact manager will fight tooth and nail to out people at the bottom of the list. And there's some great psychology behind that. So ultimately, Microsoft famously did, I believe, and then famously changed it recently in the last couple of years.
Earlier, hiring is not an HR function, it's an executive function. I would kind of take that one step further and say that compensation and ranking and how you evaluate your people is an executive function. I think that's one of the biggest improvements we were able to make in 2014 was to kind of take the standard HR form and force distribution of people and criteria that we use to rank people and really said, the heck with this, right? We know what our people are. We want a bunch of high performers. We don't want a bunch of, the bottom third gets cut every year. That's just not our model. That's not what we sell to our people as a company. And once we kind of took over from the professional services side and created the model, it was a lot of work. But once we created the model, we've had so much better buy-in. People understand their career paths. And one of the things that we actually did is make more incremental steps, like you said. And we got a lot of millennials, so
That helps.
they always
Yeah, they're earlier in the career, and for old people like me, you've had enough steps along the way that it feels like you've had steps. But when you're 5 years, 3 years in your career, you don't feel any steps. You feel stuck. It's a great little trick. Works. Yeah, it's a great point.
Well, one of the things I found is working for a bunch of large companies, working for Bell South aspect. Everybody used that once a year method of ranking, and what I've implemented along my career now is that I don't allow that. Basically, anybody who works for me, they know where they stand, but they have to make sure their teams know where they're standing. So I say you do a monthly review basically with your employees so they know where they're at. So when it comes time for us to fill out the form, you know what the form's going to say before you get there.
Yes.
So you can work with people to bring them up throughout the year because you know what? I'm filling the form out in April, and let's see, May of last year you did, it just doesn't work.
Kudos to you for having the discipline to do that. Very few managers and executives do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, one thing we did to add to that is to get transparency. Like, we're measured on utilization, revenue and margin. So every week we send the scorecard out that shows what we're doing against our other peers, and everybody's open. We know exactly where we're at. And so, to your point, when it comes time for review, you're discussing about utilization. They've known every week the whole step along the way, so there's no surprises.
You publish the utilization at the individual level?
Individual level, team level, absolutely.
we did the same thing. We were worried at first about the transparency, but people
It
see
drives.
the rise and fall. And
They become more worried about their utilization when they know it's published.
And the best people are proud that their performance is visible to everybody.
Yeah, they're pushing to go further and further and further.
And it doesn't create, in my experience, doesn't create as many negatives for the people that are struggling as you would think. It tends as often to help them become motivated as it does to disenfranchise them to feel they can't win.
the ones that can't motivate themselves shouldn't be at your company.
And it actually increases the self opt-out rate as well.
Yeah.
People
Well,
are more
if you're
likely
at top,
to.
you say, you know what, you're so utilized, you need some extra